The omega-3 fatty acids, EPA and DHA, have a positive impact on many adverse health-related conditions, and we can see that visually represented here. And without going through all of the conditions, EPA and DHA have been shown to reduce inflammation, reduce insulin resistance, and aspects of aging. In this study, which was done in rats, it increased neurogenesis. But EPA and DHA decline during aging. In particular, in centenarians, EPA and DHA are lower in centenarians when compared with younger ages. And that's what we can see here. So starting at the top, we've got EPA on the left, DHA on the right, and these are relative circulating values. These aren't actual concentrations. And here we're looking at levels for centenarians or close to centenarians, 97 years old, and their offspring, 67 years old. And there we can see that the younger age group had higher levels of EPA and DHA when compared with the centenarian group. In terms of percent reduction, centenarians had 23% lower levels of EPA and a 15% lower levels of DHA. And all of these values are significant, as looking at the p-value and FDR, false discovery rate, we can see that they're both less than 0.05. Now, with these data in mind, could lower EPA and DHA in centenarians be good for health? And the answer to that is probably not. So let's take a look at why that's the case. So here we're going to take a look at a meta-analysis of 17 studies that included more than 42,000 people for circulating levels of EPA and DHA versus all-cause mortality risk. And first, when taking a look at EPA, we've got the hazard ratio or all-cause mortality risk on the y-axis plotted against the concentration. And here they used percentile ranks, with lowest being 10th percentile and highest level of EPA at the 90th percentile. In terms of what's significant, we put up our hazard ratio of 1. Remember, where the shaded gray region is completely above or below 1, we have a significant association. And where that's true is for very low levels of EPA, as shown there with the red star. And then as we go higher than the 10th percentile, we can see that all-cause mortality risk decreases as circulating levels of EPA increase, but not very high levels of EPA, as you can see, a little bit greater than the 90th percentile level for circulating levels of EPA. That shaded gray region overlaps with 1. But for most of the EPA data, relatively low circulating levels were associated with an increased all-cause mortality risk, whereas relatively higher levels, but not at the highest level, was associated with a decreased risk. All right, what about for DHA? So here, when putting up that hazard ratio of 1, we can see that once circulating levels of DHA get to about the 50th percentile, higher levels are associated with a significantly reduced all-cause mortality risk. So for DHA, intermediate and relatively high circulating levels are associated with reduced all-cause mortality risk. Now, in this meta-analysis, they also combined EPA and DHA and looked at all-cause mortality risk. And when putting up our hazard ratio of 1, it's somewhat similar to the EPA data, where very low levels were associated with an increased all-cause mortality risk. But now we can see a close to a linear trend in terms of relatively higher levels being potentially better for reducing risk, as all values higher than the 10th percentile were associated with a reduced all-cause mortality risk. So from this study, from this meta-analysis, we can see that relatively high circulating levels of both of these fatty acids, EPA and DHA, are associated with a reduced all-cause mortality risk. And this is potentially bad news for the centenarians who had relatively lower levels of EPA and DHA when compared with their offspring. All right, so what's my data? So to address that, I sent blood for at-home metabolomics. And if you're familiar with the channel, you've probably seen this kit, Iolo's kit, a lot. They include data for 500 metabolites, and I've got a few more videos in the queue, so there'll probably be a few more coming soon. But the importance of this kit is that we can see data for kynurenine and tryptophan as components of the de novo NAD synthesis pathway. I've also made videos on taurine and polyamines, which extend lifespan, and then also metabolite ratios as an index of oxidative stress. So this kit is a gold mine of metabolites and information in terms of health and potentially longevity. Discount link if you want to use it on your own in the video's description. All right, so in terms of what's my data, we can see that here. I now have data for 2 tests in April and May, and I sent blood yesterday for test number 3, so we'll see how the next batch goes for EPA and DHA, which are shown here in micromolar concentrations. We can see that my levels are 2.6 and 6.7 micromolar for EPA and DHA respectively, which then raises the question, what's optimal? Now, in full disclosure, I think for most metabolomic studies, as Iola is a metabolomic kit, defining a precise reference range is tricky because most published metabolomic studies are untargeted, which means that the one group is just compared against another group and the actual concentrations aren't determined. So to define a range based on a metabolomic hit, I think is a little bit tricky. But what is fair to say is avoiding an age-related decline for both EPA and DHA, when considering where my values are now as a baseline, I think that's a fair bet, especially when considering that relatively low levels are associated with an increased all-cause mortality risk, and EPA and DHA are lower in centenarians when compared with offspring, so avoiding that age-related decline. All right, that's all for now. If you're interested in more about my attempts to biohack aging, check us out on Patreon. And before you go, we've got a whole bunch of discount links and merch that you may be interested in, including discount links for at-home metabolomics, NAD quantification, green tea, epigenetic testing, but also telomere testing. True Diagnostic provides that, oral microbiome composition, at-home blood testing with SciFox Health, and their panel is almost exclusively different from Iolo's kit, including ApoB, diet tracking, or if you'd like to support the channel, you can do that with the website, Buy Me a Coffee. We've also got merch, so if you're interested in wearing the ConquerAging or Diet Trying brand, that link and all of the other links will be in the video's description. Thanks for watching. I hope that you enjoyed the video. Have a great day.